SEM. And following that, we have a representative here from Cintas, Jessica. She's going to be talking a little bit more about communication, diving in a little bit more to that topic, as well as kind of rounding things off by including some more information on Cintas as well. So everyone that's involved in this meeting, please, by all means, feel free to ask questions, get involved, network and all that good stuff. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Sydney and Vanessa.
All right, I'll start sharing my screen here. All right, so today's topic, as Forrest had just mentioned, is communication. So myself and Vanessa are going to be covering it, and following that, Jessica will answer some questions and tell you a little bit more about Cintas.
So what is clear communication? I think clear communication can be defined as like four distinct things. The first being, make sure you have correct grammar and spelling. So make sure you're reading over things, making sure that your grammar and your spelling are good, because we don't like seeing emails where something's spelled wrong. Make sure you're concise. So when you're writing an email, you're talking to someone about something, make sure that what you're saying is straight to the point. Make sure what you're saying also has a clear purpose and it's coherent. So that goes back to making sure that you're reading over everything, and just make sure the person knows what you're trying to say. Someone once told me, put enough where it makes sense, but not too much where no one will read it. And that goes for having conversations or like talking to a boss. Make sure you're saying enough where they know what you're saying and understand what the point is, but not too much where they zone out or are too busy to hear the rest.
All right, so we're all in this together. As many of you know, whether you're working on group projects as engineering students or in your past internships, you're never really working on a project by yourself. You're always working with other people. So when you're getting, let's say, deliverables together or just communicating about a project, you need to remember these things. So always ask questions. Questions, I feel, can clarify a lot of information and can also prevent misunderstandings between coworkers. Like teachers say, there is never a dumb question, especially when you're first starting your career. Ask as many questions as you can because it is a learning process. And in doing that, you also need to remember to stay positive. No one likes a negative Nelly, so when you're communicating with others, try to have a good attitude about it, act like you want to be there. And then another important aspect is addressing your mistakes. So if there's a gap in miscommunication or something goes awry, make sure you address those mistakes and move on from that. And also acknowledge people's time. So let's say your boss, you can see on his Outlook calendar, has a meeting now and then a 5-minute break and then another meeting after that. That 5-minute break probably isn't a good time for you to go ask all of your questions. So acknowledge their time and realize that the key to good communication really is just respect.
So learning to adapt to the real world. Right now in school, we've been using a bunch of different programs like Drive, or like some of us use Outlook. A lot of times in the real world, they use their own programs. So in the company I'm working for currently, I'm doing a co-op, we use Microsoft Teams. A lot of these sort of features you can see all over the place, but it's good to understand what certain elements are in these programs. For one, we have things like instant messengers. These are usually for quick questions to coworkers, and expect shorter and more timely responses. Don't try to use these for like long-winded conversations. They're more to get like a quick yes or no. And then Outlook or other email platforms are just for emailing files or maybe scheduling meetings. Like Sydney said, sometimes there'll be an Outlook calendar that's connected to your email. So that's a great way to sort of schedule some meetings, and make sure you're responding to those emails. I know in classes and in schools, we sometimes just ignore those emails, but make sure you're trying to read most of those. Even if they don't necessarily apply to you. Video chat, especially given the current circumstances, is a great place for meetings and for team updates. I know every week I have to meet with my team or the people I'm working with to get kind of where they're at and just understand what's going on in the next week. Finally, shared files. In Microsoft Teams specifically, there's a place where you can share files with your team. It's a lot like Drive, but make sure you're checking those frequently. A lot of times you have to update those pretty frequently, but it's a pretty easy place for everyone to access certain things.
All right, you're in the office, so now what? So the main modes of communication that you're going to be using in the office are email, phone, team, and Zoom meeting, like we had just discussed, and then face-to-face. So here are some tips. I know when you get an email, sometimes you're busy or doing something, but try to respond as promptly as you can. You don't want to respond to an email 3-4 days late, weeks out. And then that being said, if you get an email and you don't know how to respond to that email or don't have the information, let the person know. Say, hey, I don't have the information right now, but I'll get back to you. And that way you're not leaving them hanging. Also, check your attachments, make sure you're not missing anything. It's kind of embarrassing when you're asking a question back to an email and that question was answered in the attachments they sent you. So try to avoid that. Also, check who you're responding to. You don't want to respond to the 500-person email chain. Just double check that because we've all been there, but still not something you want to do. And yeah, email, just like Vanessa had said, when you're emailing, if you're going to set up a meeting, don't just say a meeting at this time. Try to do it where it adds it to their calendar so the person doesn't have to be reminded. Next, when we're moving on to phone, check your work phone periodically if you do have a work phone, just to make sure you're not ignoring people on accident. And then also, phones are usually reserved for more pressing matters, not gossip. So I know, for instance, my boss wouldn't appreciate a phone call unless something bad were to be happening on the plant floor. So just kind of know the modes of communication and what times they're appropriate. So for team and Zoom meetings, when you're on a Zoom call, I know a lot of people want to have their cameras off, muted, but it's best to look interested and stay engaged in that and contribute meaningful information. Even taking notes is very important. And if it's a particularly important meeting, feel free to record that meeting so you can play it back. And then last but not least, face-to-face. It should be just a common thing that people know, but be polite when you're speaking to others. Don't be condescending and don't waste all of their time. No one really wants to be chatted up in the hallway for like 30 minutes. So just be respectful of that. And this isn't Thanksgiving. Maybe don't talk about politics.
So communicating your priorities. Again, when you're in the office, you're going to be given a lot of different projects and not a lot of due dates. There's not like a syllabus that you can follow in the real world. It's mainly you have to like think about what you have to do and what's important to you and what's important for your boss. So that's the first point. Know what's important. One way you can kind of figure out what is important is to communicate clear goals, expectations. Knowing those will help you prioritize maybe a larger project over something that you can do maybe months away. And another way that can kind of you can kind of prioritize things is by creating a timeline. So if you know something is due a month away, you can see that on a timeline and know that you can save that for later. When you're listening to, when someone's telling you kind of the project or kind of what they want from you, make sure you're actually listening. Make sure even if you're writing down notes. So that way, if you have a due date or something that you need to finish months away, you know what they need and you can go back and find it. And that way you can also know exactly like how difficult something is. And lastly, just plan with your supervisor. If you're going into a co-op, if you're going into an internship, even your first job, you're going to have like a supervisor or mentor of some sort. They'll help you plan because they know what's important. So make sure you're talking to them. You can meet with them, but make sure you're asking, how often are we meeting? How often do you want an update from me? In general, kind of the idea of communicating your priorities is just to be flexible. Things are going to change, things are going to shift. So make sure you're keeping an open mind and just be ready to change those plans a little.
All right, it's time to throw hands. No, don't. So in all seriousness, it's just inevitable. You're not going to get along with everyone that you work with. And here are some ways to try to de-escalate that situation and keep it civil in the workplace. So first, try to clarify the source of conflict. Sometimes people might not even know that there is conflict. It could just be a misunderstanding. After that, try to talk it out. Make sure to listen to each person's side and actually listen and put yourselves in their shoes. And try to do this in private. You don't want to be hashing it out with your coworker in front of other people. Um, and then arrive at a common goal. So when you're working as a team, you're all working towards the same goal. You want to complete your project, just kind of improve the workplace and that environment. So they want the same thing that you do. And in doing so, establish those roles and responsibilities that will get you guys to that compromise. And then now try to identify conflict before it happens so you can avoid it.
Oh, so that's kind of a general layout of communication. We spoke a little from our experiences, but it's definitely good to have someone who's actually been in the industry for a while. So we're gonna have Jessica from Cintas talk to us a little bit more about real world communication.
Yeah, thank you so much, ladies. So I'm super excited to be here with you guys today. As I said, I'm Jessica. I'm from Cintas Corporation. So I'll start by just giving you an introduction of myself, of Cintas, and then get into just a little bit of my experience with workplace communication. So I've been with Cintas for going on 4 years now. I'm a graduate of Grand Valley State University. I graduated in 2016 with a double major in psychology and sociology. So all in the field of working with people. I was in my field of study for about 1.5 years before I was looking just for that career change. And Cintas happened to be hiring for an HR manager, and I applied, and here I am almost 4 years later. So for those of you that don't know about Cintas, so we're in the service industry. So we provide different products and services to businesses to get them ready for the workday. So we do anywhere from uniform apparel, floor mats, toiletry products, cleaning supplies. We have a large linen line as well. So if you don't know of Cintas, and now that you're learning about Cintas, you're going to start seeing our trucks all over the place. When you walk into any kind of facility, whether it's a hotel, restaurant, casino, your school, you're going to see the floor mats, and on the side it'll say Cintas. So we're all over the place. I know, through everything with COVID, there's been a lot of changes to businesses, and thankfully Cintas has come out stronger than ever just because of the products and services that we provide to our customers. So it's a lot of those products that businesses need in order to service their customers. When Cindy and Michaela had reached out to talk to you guys tonight about communication, I thought, it's so broad when you think about communication. But when you think about it, it's something that's so, so important for every business and organization to have effective communication at their place of business or wherever it is that you're going to be working during school and even after graduation too. One of the things that I love so much about Cintas is we're constantly looking for ways that we can get feedback from our partners. So we do different things like engagement surveys and different things, and they'll constantly send out just how we're doing as an organization. And something that they actually recently sent out, and this isn't something that came from Cintas, but they had passed along that 74% of employees in a workplace feel as though they don't receive the communication that they need from their employer. And I know that number seems so high. When I relate it back to my experience specifically, we do something at my location that I call them coffee chats, where I literally just sit down with partners and get feedback from them on how things are going. And something that I hear 9 times out of 10 is that my partners, and that's what we call each other at Cintas, is partners, not employees, but is that they want more communication, or that they feel that the communication can be improved. And then my follow-up question is always, what do you wish that you would have had more communication on? Or what is it that you think that we can do to improve our communication? And most of the time they always say, I don't know. But that's what I tell my managers is our partners don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they want communicated more because they don't know what the information is that they're missing out on. So I would say the more communication, the better. And then just making sure too that you have different systems in place. How I relate to that to Cintas specifically, we could have a sales rep go out and completely kill it in the field, where they hit one of our targets and we sell our largest account as ever. And then after that, they think, okay, I've made the sale, my job is done. But it's really about that link between sales and service of how we can communicate to make sure this is a smooth transition so that the customer has a good experience. If a sales rep goes out and sells to a customer, it goes to our service department, and then the service rep gets there and is like, okay, I know they have 150 mats that they need laid down, and I have 50 employee uniforms, but they don't know what door they have to go in, who their contact is, where they're supposed to put the garments, and where the floor mats go. That's not a good experience for our customers. So it's all about just making sure that you have good systems in place to make sure that our partners have a good experience, but then our customers too. There's 4 different things specifically that really stick out to me when I look at just effective communication. With that, the first one is, I would say, is just making sure that you understand your audience. Why do you guys think that this is so important, whether it's at school or in the workplace? And feel free to just chip in whenever. Any insight? I'm putting you guys on the spot. No? So I know specifically at Cintas, and at this point I've worked, in the restaurant industry, I worked in social work, and now I'm in the business field. It's so important to know your audience. I oversee 2 locations, so our Grand Rapids facility and our Traverse City location as well. So I work anywhere from our frontline production partners that their day-to-day is rolling mats or folding towels. But at the same time, I'm also presenting to our sales representatives who are in the field selling, or our service sales representatives who you see driving those big bright trucks. So really knowing your audience is so important, because maybe how I present something to one of those groups is completely different than how I would present it to the next group. And it's just being able to read the audience. Another thing that I think is so important on that too is having that emotional intelligence to be able to, again, just read your audience and see, just the emotion in the room of how you're presenting the different items or tasks that you're talking about. Another huge thing that I've learned in my experience, and granted, I work in HR, so this is something that comes across my desk frequently and something that I spend a lot of my day-to-day on, but how to handle conflict resolution. So with conflict resolution in the field of business that I'm in, there's 3 different subcategories that I would say I work with the most when I'm working with conflict resolution. There's manager to employee, customer conflict, and then peer-to-peer conflict. I think that even those 3 different subcategories, they're completely different in how you're handling those different situations, and just different guidance that I'll give on those. But at the same time, I think that there's a couple things that really hold true in how you're handling that conflict. I have some tips and tricks that I'll give my managers when different situations come up. I would say the first and the most important is, I call it that 12 to 24 hour rule. You may get an email or a text message or a phone call, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard that term, emotionally hijacked, where they completely take over your emotion. I think everybody responds in a different way and what that emotion may be, but it's so important in the field of business and when you guys are in the field to make sure that you're not reacting out of emotion. So sometimes it's good to let that email or that voicemail sit there for 12 to 24 hours so you can sleep on it, get your head together to know how you want to adequately respond to that. I would say that's something that's so important. But at the same time, finding that balance from, okay, I need to get my emotions in check, but at the same time, respond in a timely fashion. I always say by not having a conversation, you're still having the conversation. So making sure that you're having that conversation sooner than later is very, very important. At the same time, focusing on the issue, not on the person. So really, what is it specifically that happened with the peer-to-peer or the manager and the employee, or at the customer location. Okay, let's walk through exactly what happened. And that's where it comes into the active listening that I think Vanessa had mentioned a little bit before. Sometimes I think that, and I'm at fault for this too, I talk way too much, but there's no fault in sitting and just being quiet and listening to somebody. I think that's so important to just listen, and have somebody just walk you through exactly what happened or how they're feeling. And you just sit there and you just listen and you let them talk. And then you can kind of come up with just what your reaction is going to be with that. But again, it's important to focus on the situation and not the person specifically. Again, active listening, huge. A tactic that I always use, and again, sometimes you have a $5,000 a week customer that's yelling in your ear because this didn't happen or that didn't happen, and really just listen. Sometimes people just need to vent about the situation, and then you talk about the solution, which is the next point of, okay, how can we make this better? What can we do for you, and how can we prevent this from happening in the future? And then you get their insight too, and their feedback. So you know that when you walk out of there, is there anything else that you think that we should talk about today? And then you're really getting the feedback from the customers, the employees, or the managers. One thing I wanted to add on that too, just with conflict resolution, and I think that this is something that's becoming more and more prevalent these days, is text message. There are so often when I'll have my partners that will reach out to me via text about something that they're frustrated with or different questions that they have. And it's so important to just pick up the phone and call them. Or a lot of times they'll say, see me when you get back today. A lot of things that I think happen via text message these days should be in-person conversations. Same thing with email, being able to understand, okay, what should be an email, what should be a phone conversation. It's just my style. I prefer to pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone rather than a text chain or an email chain. And then at the same time, you're protecting yourself too. With that, do you guys have any questions on conflict resolution, whether it's peer-to-peer, manager-to-peer, or with customers?
Yeah, I actually have one. So, when there's a conflict from employee to manager, I know sometimes it's hard to bring up because there's kind of a power struggle there. So they obviously are superior to you, and maybe how to bring that up without offending them or being on their bad side, but also voicing your opinion and what you feel is wrong, and how to kind of resolve something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is something that we really stress at Cintas, is having an open door policy. No matter what business field you go into, so whether you are, you know, a direct report working under somebody or you're a manager at a facility, I think that there's different things that you can put in place and do to give constant feedback and constant communication. But something stressed right from the start when I'm working with somebody is, I want the feedback and I want the open communication. You know, I have a specific example that comes to mind. And granted, a lot of my examples are coming from an HR standpoint, but we had an event at our facility and we run 3 shifts. So that's something that is always top priority, is to make sure that our 3rd shift partners feel just as much included as our 1st shift partners do. And this was, I would say, about 6 or 7 months ago now, where we had an event early in the morning, and there was a miscommunication with my 3rd shift, and none of them participated because they were so upset about the miscommunication. So I brought them all in a room and we just walked through it. Okay, tell me about what happened on Thursday evening. Why did nobody come to the event? Tell me what your expectations were coming into it. And I think really having that open dialogue is so important, as, you know, I'm coming at it from a manager perspective. So whether it's you're coming at it from a direct report or a manager, having an open communication and saying, I'm open to the feedback. If there's things that you want to see from me, please let me know. So I think a lot of that is driven by the manager in this situation. But I think you can kind of drive that open feedback from from your standpoint too, if you're just going into an organization at that lower level of saying, I really want the feedback, and I can tell you 9 times out of 10, that manager is going to want that same thing for them too. Hopefully
you.
that answered your question.
It did, thanks.
Good. Any other questions on conflict resolution? No? Okay, good deal. So the next thing is just with, or something that I find really important is clear expectations with communication. I've been with Cintas for 4 years now, and I've seen really opposite ends of the spectrum of what our partners are looking for. I've worked with some partners who they want me to be completely hands off. They want me to give them a task and they can go fly. I've also worked with other partners who want extremely set deadlines. We have a meeting 2 or 3 times a week to go over those. So I think it's really important to set those expectations of, okay, what do I expect as a direct report, and what does the manager expect too? So, you know, again, having clear expectations. My boss I've been working for 4 years, he one time said to me, and this has always really stuck with me, is if people are missing deadlines, there's 2 reasons why they're missing deadlines. The expectations weren't clear, or it's a can't do or won't do. So you kind of have to distinguish between those 2. So I think that having very, very clear expectations right from the start of, okay, you know, Vanessa, I'm going to give you this task. Let's plan to touch base on Wednesday at 10 a.m. to see where it's going. But at the same time, with the expectations, if you guys have specific due dates, and this happens with me too, it's always important to just communicate and make sure that you're on track to where you need to be with those deadlines. And if you're not going to be, communicate that. What we always say at Cintas, what I tell my partners and what my boss tells me too, is you can drop the rubber balls, but don't drop the glass balls. Glass balls is very, very important deadlines if there's meetings, if there's different things that are going on. With the rubber balls, say it's, you know, I forgot to send this email or this reminder, just different things. There's different balls that you can be dropping. Don't drop the glass balls. And if you're going to drop the balls, make sure to communicate that to your manager, whoever it is that's waiting for that. The more communication, the better. And I'm sure that your boss or your manager is going to feel that same way, as long as you're communicating it so they're not wondering, okay, now it's 10 a.m. or 10:30 on Wednesday. Vanessa, where was that? You were supposed to send that to me by 10. Communication is key in those situations. And then another thing that I want to talk about too is just with direct reports. I know Sydney and Vanessa had talked about this a little bit, but I think that every business and organization has really picked up their own way of doing things. And it's so important to adapt with those things. I think Microsoft Teams, since the pandemic has started, has really completely taken over. I see that with so many organizations now, is that things are over Microsoft Teams. So that is the same thing that goes with that open and clear communication that you can have. I have a trainee that I work directly with out of my Grand Rapids facility, and we have our own Teams page. So everything's a live document, which makes it really, really easy to have that open communication and to know exactly where she's at on different projects or where I'm at with different things that I've been working on. So really, when you get into the business field, or when you get into the field that you're going to be working in, really become familiar with the different platforms that they're using. Another one that's really popular is OneNote. I don't know if anybody has used OneNote, but that's another thing that I pushed back for a long time. I used to be a paper girl, paper planner, paper to-do list. And then I switched to OneNote, and it completely changed just how I organize myself. So really taking time to adapt to the different platforms that you're using is very, very important. So with that, do you guys have any questions for me just about Cintas, you know, about what we do, or anything related to communication?
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I don't know how much hiring you do, or if you have any, if you do any of that, but I'm sure in human resources, you know. How would you say, like in an interview or even over email or something, how can you like tell if the person you're talking to has good communication skills or is able to communicate to you and your company in a really good way?
Yeah, great question. One thing specifically I would say comes to mind is making sure that your emails don't look like text messages, whether it's from abbreviations or how you start the email or how you end the email. One thing that I really like to see, and by no means is this a deal breaker, but I love to see signatures in the email. So whether it's your name, your phone number, your major, different things like that. I think that's really good to see. I know from an employer standpoint, especially around this time, we're doing so much hiring and so much recruiting that really takes away a step in the process. If you already have your phone number right there in your email, so that I don't have to ask you for it. So different things like that I think are good. But really with grammar, just proofreading your emails. I think it's something that's pretty common. Like I said, it's not a deal breaker, especially because once somebody's hired, I love to give that feedback of how to have business etiquette when you're writing emails, but just making sure that you're proofreading and that you're taking time to actually write those emails. But on that too, following up, I think is really good. As an employer, we get super, super busy, and we like to have really good response time when we interview candidates and have specific processes in place to make sure that there is that frequent follow-up. But if you don't hear from an employer, definitely feel free to follow up with them. I had an interview on this date. I'm really excited about the opportunity to join your company. Do you have an update on my interview? We love to see stuff like that too. What other questions do you guys have?
Yeah, so I have a question kind of circling back to the topic of conflict resolution. Um, I guess from your experience, maybe some advice for everyone that's listening on some words and approaches, techniques to avoid when trying to resolve conflicts or when approaching conflicts. Any of the three categories really just might be good to elaborate on some of those, because that's like, without the experience and knowing where kind of these paths lead, if I take this route, talking through some of those is a good way to prevent people from maybe taking those wrong steps early on.
Yeah, you cut out just a little bit when you said that. So you said what different words to avoid or different phrases to avoid that would make the situation worse. Is that what you had asked?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, from like, for the young, unexperienced, professionals that are listening right now, I think it might be kind of cool to talk through some of those like common things that you see, especially when interfacing with people that are newer to industry, and then kind of why those approaches are wrong, and then maybe just to close on that, what maybe some of your favorite techniques are for resolving conflict.
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different things that come to mind. I would say one specifically goes back to making sure that you are prepared to have the conversation. So that 12 to 24-hour rule, I think, is really, really important, especially because different things will happen or a situation happens. And I had this with one of my partners who walked into my office early one morning and was just completely sobbing because she was so frustrated with the situation. And she came back that afternoon. She's like, I completely overreacted. I don't feel that way. This is what happened. And that I think happens to us a lot, where all of a sudden we just kind of, lack of better terms, just word vomit on how we've been feeling. Whereas if we actually just sleep on it, gather our thoughts, I think that's very, very important. Another thing too, going back to that, by not having a conversation, you're still having a conversation. I know things that I found really, really helpful, especially in my job, because I never know, wearing a lot of hats. Someone's going to come to me if the ketchup is out in the break room. If the bathroom is leaking, they're going to come to me if they are having the worst day of their life, the best day of their life. You have to be prepared to handle any of those situations that come your way. So my technique is just listening. I think that's the most important thing. But then even if you're not prepared to have a conversation and you need to gather your thoughts, so again, whether it's from a direct report or manager standpoint, even I am not able to talk about this right now. Can we talk about it at 11:30? And then you're still having the conversation and they know, okay, we're going to talk about it at 11:30. They can gather their thoughts. You can gather your thoughts. From the standpoint of just different phrases to kind of avoid when talking about that conflict resolution, is saying things like, when you did this, or kind of talking about them as a person. That's definitely something that I always avoid. It's more so just walking through the situation from start to finish of, whether it's based off of their performance or based off of just a different situation that may have happened in the break room, walking through the situation and saying, how can we prevent this from happening in the future? What do you think went wrong in this situation? And really just having that open dialogue instead of it being, when you did this and you should have done it this way, because that's when it really, people start to get defensive. And that's important to avoid that.
Yeah, I think that was a great response. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Well, I so appreciate all of your guys' time today. Vanessa, I don't know if you had my contact information on that slide, but I 100% would always be willing to talk to you guys just about different situations that you may come across. If you're ever, wanting advice on your resume or life after graduation, whatever it is. It was such a short while ago that I was in your guys' shoes. I know that nearing graduation, especially during everything that's going on with COVID and everything, is a really scary thing. So anything that I can do to help you guys, I would definitely love to do. And if nobody else has any questions, I think I'll turn it back over to Vanessa or Forrest.
Thanks, Jessica. Vanessa, anything else to add?
No, I think she covered some great things, especially with conflict resolution. I really liked her talking about just like the different hierarchies. I think that's definitely tough to navigate, especially like working now. I like never know like how to talk to anyone because I'm just like everyone's a different age, everyone's at a different point. So I think that was great. I can definitely add her contact on the website later today if anyone wants to contact Jessica and ask her. I know sometimes it can be a little hard to ask questions in a meeting. So definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica.
Bye. Have a good day.